The Solitude That Leads to Greatness, a Zen story of inner peace. In a remote valley hidden among mountains lived a man named Haru. Since his youth, he had felt a strange affinity for solitude, as if in the world's silence he found a truth that others ignored. While the village celebrated summer nights with glowing lanterns and laughter, he preferred to walk along the riverbank, listening to the whisper of the water, letting himself be enveloped by the stillness. The villagers looked at him strangely. Poor Haru, some would say. His heart is empty, but Haru felt no emptiness. He felt something different, something he could not explain. One day, an elderly monk visited the village and heard of Haru. Intrigued, he decided to seek him out in the forest where he often wandered. Upon finding him, he asked, "Son, why do you distance yourself from the world?" Haru smiled slightly and replied, "I'm not distancing myself from the world, Master. I simply listen to what the world says when others fall silent." The monk nodded, understanding that this young man was not merely a recluse, but someone who had begun to discover something valuable. The monk sat beside Haru on the riverbank. The waters flowed calmly, reflecting the sunlight in golden glimmers. After a long silence, the monk spoke. "Solitude, young Haru, is not an abandonment of the world, but a way to find the truth that lies within it. Many fear solitude because they believe it separates them from life, but in reality, it is the path that brings you closer to the greatness of your being." Haru looked at the monk, his eyes full of questions. "Greatness?" he asked, not fully understanding. The monk smiled, as if he already knew what Haru needed to learn. "Greatness is not in what you do, but in what you are. Solitude allows you to dive into your own heart, where the noise of the world can no longer reach you. Only there, in the deep emptiness, can you hear your true voice." The young man reflected on the monk's words, and though he did not yet fully grasp them, he felt something deep stir within him. Days later, Haru continued his daily walk through the forest, but something had changed in him. He couldn't stop thinking about the monk's words. Greatness is in what you are. At first, he didn't quite understand how to find that greatness. How could something as intangible as solitude lead him to something so grand? That afternoon, as he walked among the trees, he saw a small flower slowly opening toward the sun. It was a solitary flower, isolated in a corner of the forest, surrounded by fallen leaves and branches. Yet, it seemed to need nothing more than its own existence to be complete. The wind caressed it gently, and the flower, unhurried, appeared to be at peace with itself. Haru stopped to observe it, and for a moment, time faded away. In that simple flower, he understood something profound. The flower did not compare itself to others, did not strive to be more beautiful or to attract attention. It simply existed, fully accepting its being. It did not need companionship, admiration, or fame. It was great not because it sought to be, but because it had surrendered to its own nature. In that instant, Haru realized that solitude was not a punishment but an opportunity. Greatness did not come from external seeking but from inner surrender. With this newfound understanding, Haru decided to spend more time in solitude, not as an escape, but as a path to self-realization. Each day, he immersed himself more in the stillness of the forest, where hours passed without haste. He no longer felt solitude as emptiness. Solitude had become a fertile space for his inner growth. One morning, as the sun rose, the monk visited him again. He found Haru sitting by the same riverbank, in complete serenity. "I see you have begun to understand," said the monk, observing his calm expression. Haru nodded, but his gaze was now deeper, more serene. "Solitude has shown me something I did not understand before," he replied. "It is not isolation that separates me from the world, but the noise that pulls me away from my own being. Greatness is in learning to listen to that stillness." The monk smiled and, with a gentle gesture, pointed to the river. "Do you see how the water flows effortlessly? Though it has a destination, it does not rush. Its greatness is not in its speed, but in its ability to flow with life as it is. In the same way, you must flow with your own nature. Solitude teaches you to be like the water, not to resist the flow of life, but to surrender to it." Haru looked at the river, and for the first time, he felt he did not need to control his life. He no longer had to hurry, nor struggle against the currents of fate. He simply had to flow. Seasons passed, and Haru continued his journey of self-discovery. Each time he found himself alone, he felt more at peace. Sometimes, he would sit by the riverbank, watching the waves pass without haste, without fear. He learned to listen to the teachings of the wind, to see wisdom in the small things. The whisper of the leaves, the dance of a branch broken by time, the way the light filtered through the clouds at sunset. Everything seemed to speak in silence, and Haru no longer feared that silence, for he knew it held the truth. One day, upon returning to the village, he noticed something strange in the air. The usual bustle, the laughter, and the noise of conversations no longer disturbed him. Instead of wanting to flee, Haru felt unified with it all. The world no longer seemed foreign to him, but an extension of his being. In that moment, he understood that true greatness was not about escaping the world or embracing solitude in isolation, but about being present, both in stillness and in noise, with the same inner peace. As he entered the village, many looked at him, surprised to see him there, back among them. "Haru, where have you been?" they asked. "Nowhere and everywhere." Haru replied with a calm smile. "I have been within myself." The monk, watching from a distance, nodded in satisfaction. He knew the true lesson had been learned. Over time, Haru became known for his inner peace, not for his words nor for grand actions, but for the deep calm that radiated from him. The villagers, who once saw him as a strange recluse, now sought him for guidance. Many of them felt the burdens of life, trapped in the demands of work, expectations, and the noise of the world. They came to him not seeking quick solutions, but a refuge where they could remember what it meant to be truly free. One day, a young man from the village approached Haru, clearly distressed. "Haru, how did you find peace? How did you come to understand what truly matters? I feel like my life is full of noise, of expectations that I don't even know if I want to follow. How can I find what you have?" Haru looked at him kindly and, after a brief silence, replied, "Peace is not something you seek outside, young one. It is something you cultivate in the silence of your own being. The greatness of your life lies in your ability to listen to what the world has to offer in silence, without clinging to anything or fearing anything. Solitude is not your enemy. It is the mirror that shows you who you truly are." The young man remained silent, looking at Haru with a mix of doubt and wonder. Haru continued, "Do not run away from solitude. Rather, embrace it as a friend. Because in the end, solitude is not empty. It allows you to find yourself, and when you find yourself, the whole world becomes a clearer place." The young man nodded slowly, as if Haru's words were beginning to sink in. After a while, he thanked him and walked away, his mind more at ease, though still searching. Time passed, and life in the village moved with the seasons. Haru became a beacon of peace, not because he sought it, but because he had learned to be in harmony with life as it was. His greatest teaching was not one that could be explained in words, but one that had to be lived. The stillness in his heart was his true mastery. One day, as he walked along the riverbank, Haru met the old monk once again. This time, the monk seemed to have traveled a long road, and his eyes reflected an even deeper wisdom. "Haru," said the monk, without needing more words, "you have found what many seek without knowing they already possess. Your greatness does not lie in what you have achieved or in what others think of you, but in your ability to simply be who you are. You have understood that solitude is not a condemnation, but a refuge that offers you the possibility of finding the peace that lies beyond the noise of the world." Haru smiled, understanding that his journey was not yet over, but that each step taken in solitude had allowed him to see beyond the illusions that once distracted him. Greatness, he realized, is not found in what one can do, but in what one is capable of being. Free from external expectations, accepting oneself as one is. The monk bid farewell with one final teaching. "Remember, Haru, the river flows only when it accepts the course of its bed. So must you with life. Only when you surrender to the natural flow of things will you experience true greatness." Haru remained by the river, reflecting on his words. Despite the vastness of the world and the clamor of life, he knew that his path to peace was already laid out. It was a path without beginning or end, like the flow of water. Greatness did not arrive in a single moment, but was lived in every instant, in every breath. Over time, Haru ceased to be just a man of the village. He became a symbol, not for what he had done, but for what he had become. People came to him not in search of quick answers, but in search of the peace he radiated. His life became a silent testimony to the truth he had found in solitude, a truth that could not be explained in words but was deeply felt by those who were near him. In his old age, Haru returned to the place where it all began, by the river, where stillness and calm surrounded him. He was a transformed man, not by the passage of time, but by his acceptance of it. In the solitude he had once feared as a young man, he had found refuge for his soul. In that refuge, he understood the nature of life, just as fleeting as the flowing current that never stops. And so, sitting by the river, Haru closed his eyes for the last time, at peace, knowing he had discovered what many were still searching for. Greatness is not something to be conquered. It is something to be allowed. Solitude, in its purest form, is not a void to be feared, but a mirror that allows us to reflect the vastness of our deepest being. The river kept flowing, and the world kept turning, but in the stillness of Haru's heart, life had found its greatest form.